protein cycling is a real thing. We've heard of carb cycling. It's where you go periods of time with higher carbohydrate, period of time with lower carbohydrate, where you're kind of balancing a little bit of the fat loss side of lower carb with perhaps the insulin spike and the potential mTOR activation with carb days to help you with muscle growth. Well, there's actually some evidence behind surging protein in different ways, right? Because believe it or not, muscle protein synthesis can become a little bit desensitized. And we have evidence, a couple newer studies and some other just larger bodies of research that show that having protein in these kind of larger, more defined boluses could be really beneficial for muscle protein synthesis overall. I'll open with a study that looked at different amounts of protein at different times. It was really intriguing. This study was published in the journal Physiology, and they dubbed it mTOR priming. So utilizing protein in different amounts to get the maximum amount of what's called mTOR, or P70S6K phosphorylation, which is essentially the downstream effect leading to muscle protein synthesis, where we're building muscle. Now, what they did in this study is they had subjects resistance train, and then over a period of like a half day, like 10, 12 hours, they had them consume different amounts of protein at different time intervals. So for example, one group, they had to do it frequently with low protein. They had them consume 10 grams of protein every hour and a half, okay? So totaling 80 grams of protein, which isn't that much, but still gets the point across. Okay, then the intermediate group consumed every 3 hours. They had 20 grams of protein. And then finally, there was what they called the bolus group. The bolus group had 40 grams of protein every 6 hours. So with this group, they were looking at like, okay, longer periods of time and then a spike. And what they actually found with the study is that having longer periods of time sensitized the people to protein better. So when they had a period of time without protein coming in and then a spike, they had the biggest surge in mTOR activation and P70S6K. And this wasn't just at that time, because you could make the argument saying, well, yeah, the spike's going to be bigger. They just had 40 grams versus someone having 10 grams. They were looking at the collective activation. So the collective activation surge, there was more muscle protein synthesis, or at least P70S6K phosphorylation eluding to that. And what's interesting is when you look at the whole protein cycling kind of idea, you can borrow a lot of the information from intermittent fasting and some of the evidence there. And I'll just give you one quick study on this that was looking at alternate day fasting, where they had subjects do 25% of their normal calories one day as their alternate day fast, and then the next day just ate ad libitum as much as they wanted to, compared to a control group that ate ad libitum. And what they found is that the time-restricted feeding group ended up eating less and losing more fat, but they had the same amount of muscle preserved as the people that ate the regular diet. What that tells us is that the body is quick to adapt and make it so that you can preserve muscle through these periods of time. What's important is that you're ultimately meeting your protein needs, but having protein cycling where you say, I'm going to go 1 day or 2 days of lower protein and then maybe 1 or 2 days of higher protein, right? So you're sensitizing and then having more. Think of it like carbohydrates. We remove carbohydrates from our diet for a little bit, we get more insulin sensitive, and it happens fast. Now, obviously, you can consume things like whey protein. You can consume things like dairy protein. Whey protein is highly insulinogenic and it's going to absorb fast. But generally speaking, I recommend getting a protein that's going to be like straight up ground beef and mix it with a protein shake. Not literally mix it, but like have a protein shake and like ground beef, right? That way you're getting rapid absorption, fast, quick hit of muscle protein synthesis. And if we go back to the old study from 2023, where we look at like you can have a large amount of protein in one sitting and it's going to get utilized, but you want to do something that's like high, quick absorbing and something that's a little slower absorbing like ground beef. Put a link for the ground beef that I use. Definitely my favorite, hands down, bar none. It's the Butcher Box ground beef and their ground bison. But all their cuts of meat are amazing. They have chicken, they have steak, they have fillets, they have, if you are a meat person, if you are into steaks, if you're into burger patties, if you're into ground beef and bison, look no further. Seriously. Game changer. They were the first sponsor ever on my channel, literally, because their stuff is that good. Like they sent me some, what was it, 9 years ago or something. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is the best ground beef I've ever had in my life. So that link down below is access to ButcherBox. Also, they deliver it right to your doorstep. You can look at my custom cuts and the ones that I recommend, the ones that I use. That link is down below in the top line of the description. So when you combine like a good quality meat, you're obviously getting the slower digesting protein, but all the evidence with muscle protein synthesis and like whey protein is really strong too. So have a whey protein shake first if you're gonna have a large bolus of protein, and then follow it up with like a larger piece of meat or ground beef. Because here's the thing, with the one study that we looked at back in December 2023, I always forget where it's published, but we'll put it down in the show notes and here in the video itself because we can find it in post. That is such a powerful study because it told us that, well, we can have a large amount of protein in one sitting, and it works just as good as having multiple smaller servings. Flat out. It might even work better because the insulin or the muscle protein synthesis rate might be higher. Now, this brings us to another point that's really important though. The whole idea of protein cycling isn't just because we can get more protein in one large sitting. Just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? Well, there's a lot of theoretical evidence that if we abstain from protein for periods of time, we have what is called an anabolic rebound. Now, the Journal of Translational Medicine really proves this point nicely with a time-restricted feeding fasting group versus a normal diet group. Now, they are both obviously on a little bit of a diet, but at the end of the day, at the end of the study, in an 8-week period of time, they both preserved muscle mass the exact same, even though the time-restricted feeding group had periods of time without food. What this tells us again is that sometimes this is independent of calories. Like the calories allowed for more total weight loss, total fat loss, but the TRF group preserved more muscle. Why? Why do these fasting groups actually preserve muscle better in these shorter fasts, not super long fasts, of course, than even regular caloric restriction? It's because after just a short amount of time, you develop an adaptation to preserve the muscle. So if your body can learn to preserve muscle through these periods of time with lower protein, then when you do have protein, you get more out of it. But not only that, you don't atrophy or have as much catabolism in the windows in between. So now, some of this needs to be fleshed out, but here's what an example would look like if you were to do it. You could do it intra-day. So you could say, hey, I'm gonna start with like I'm gonna start with a low protein breakfast, maybe a lower protein lunch, and keep your other macros however you'd want, and then go bolus of protein in the evening. Or like I do a lot of times, I'll do actually somewhat lower protein than I normally would have in the morning, and then I will do a protein spike at lunch, and then kind of let it come down the rest of the day, so that in the morning, I'm sort of in that protein low phase again, and I'll do it again. So I'll do 2 days of that, right? So 2 days where my protein is just kind of peaking only at lunch. But my total protein is still where I want it to be. I'm just not having these even boluses. Another way that you could do it is actually flat out protein fast. Okay, so let's say you're someone that fasts a lot. What if you were to just say, hey, instead of totally fasting, I'm just gonna protein fast, like 2 days out of the week, where I'm gonna keep my fats at a certain point, and maybe my carbs at a certain point, or just one or the other, right? You see a lot of people right now doing the sugar fast, and it sounds extreme, but what if like you were to just take 1 day and just go very low protein, moderate carb, and that's like a carb fast, right? And then the next day, keep the carbs lower and bring the protein back in. The point is, it's very similar, like with Walter Longo's work, how he has people reduce protein and then kind of go high fat to a certain degree. It's like he's fasting mimicking, because all these benefits come in from protein restriction when it comes to autophagy and whatnot. But if you're looking at muscle mass, you need to have a rebound. You can't just go on like that forever. But it's interesting because there's a lot of people that consume lower amounts of protein and still preserve muscle. And it makes you wonder, are you adapting a mechanism that's making you preserve? So when you look at all the different bodies of evidence saying that it doesn't matter how much protein you have as long as you get it in, we could start extrapolating that the boluses might be stronger. And the biggest, strongest people that I know eat like that. And they are not constantly a victim to having to find the perfect amount of protein at every specific meal. They're not stressed about it. They're not enslaved to it. They can just eat protein when they want to eat protein. And their bodies are strong and big. I'll see you tomorrow.